Hey everyone, welcome to our Global Accessibility Awareness Day. We love starting on time, so thanks to those of you who have joined us. We might have some folks join us a little bit late, that's totally fine too. Please keep in mind that you do have access to commenting in here, so any comments that you share across the different networks we're broadcasting right now, those will show up for us. So if there are questions and comments along the way, we can do our best to address those. But welcome to the session. My name is Michael Vaughn. I'm an adoption education specialist here with OpenLMS. So I get to do a lot of work in OpenLMS Academy, designing and leading courses, working with clients one-on-one, doing some outreach with some folks. So we're very, very excited that you joined us today. This is a topic that I know a lot of us here at OpenLMS care a lot about. It's a topic that I care a lot about. I've been working with instructional and educational technology for over a decade and a half at this point. Mostly in higher ed, but in the corporate world as well. And making sure that content is fully accessible to learners is definitely a big passion of mine. I don't like when folks are left out. It's definitely frustrating for me. So very grateful that you all joined us today. We're going to talk about some strategies for making course content more accessible, along with some of the challenges that come along and why I think some folks don't do necessarily as much as they possibly could in their course design. So as a quick overview of our hour, I want to talk very briefly about what Global Accessibility Awareness Day is so that you have a little bit more context for that. It's a really fantastic movement, and not everyone knows necessarily what the goal of that is. And I just wanted to give them a quick little shout out. We've been doing an Accessibility Awareness Day presentation for the past several years, and we're very happy to be a part of it. It's an excellent organization. It's an excellent day. And just wanted to, again, give them a little nod before we get rolling. I'll briefly talk about what accessibility means and why it's important. I won't spend a ton of time there because I'm assuming that since you self-selected to attend this session, that you feel pretty comfortable in believing in accessibility and the importance of accessibility in course design and development and content development. So we'll talk a little bit about what that is so that we have a common definition, and also talk about some mindsets that are really helpful when we get into this larger conversation. From there, since this session is about how we might use AI-powered tools to improve the accessibility of educational content for learners who have impairments or disabilities, we'll do a quick overview of artificial intelligence. If those of you have been in any of our sessions about artificial intelligence recently, it'll be a helpful refresher. And then we'll talk about some ideas for taking those AI-powered tools to make content more accessible for others. So to jump right in, Global Accessibility Awareness Day, I put the full blurb from their website. I usually don't put a lot of text on slides, but I'm going to put the whole thing up here. This is a blurb from their website about why they do what they do. And really, the gist of it is there's a belief, and I share this belief, that everyone deserves a first-rate experience when they are interacting with digital content. And this is not a made-up statistic. This is not an exaggeration. Almost 100% of all website landing pages have some level of accessibility issues with them. They either violating web-based standards or something like that might prevent someone using a screen reader, or someone who's using a keyboard because they can't use a pointing device like a mouse, from being able to properly access content. And the average number of errors on a website homepage is about 60. So this is clearly a problem with web design in general, and we can do our part by taking extra care when we build educational content for our learners, regardless of the context, whether it's corporate training, whether it's higher education, whether it's K-12. So this is a really excellent organization. They have one of the best URLs I've ever seen. If you want to learn more about them, find some great information, find some great resources, their link is accessibility.day. Fantastic link. I'm very jealous of that URL. So just accessibility.day, one of the best links I've ever seen in my life. Let's talk very briefly about what accessibility means and why it's mattered, or why it matters, while I sip on my tea from this Doctor Who Christmas mug. Because we had another session earlier this morning for the folks over in Europe, Middle East, and Africa. I don't think this will be too hard of a sell to folks who voluntarily came to a session about accessibility, but just to put things in context, the current estimates are about 16% of all people globally live with a disability. And it is worth noting that most disabilities come with comorbidities, which means there's not just one prominent disability, there are usually multiples. This has a huge impact on health and wellness. So folks with really chronic or extreme disabilities tend to live about 20 years less than folks who do not. We very much have a society that is built for folks who are unimpaired, who do not have disabilities, and we unfortunately leave a lot of folks out in that. And I want you to understand, like 16%, it sounds like a small number because it's like 16 out of 100. But what that equates to is that 1 in every 6 people that you meet have some form of a disability or impairment. For example, I wear glasses. I am legally not allowed to drive in the state of North Carolina where I live if I don't have my glasses on. I could be ticketed if I'm pulled over driving without them. And I could potentially lose my license because it's not safe for me to do that. My vision's very poor without corrective lenses or corrective solutions like, I don't know why I'm blanking on contact lenses. My goodness. All right. I probably should have picked the caffeinated tea. So 1 in 6 people that you meet, on average, have some sort of disability, and that equates to about 1.3 billion people in the world. That's an enormous number. It's actually very hard for us to conceptualize how big that is. I know it seems like an attainable number because we're looking at the 1.3 part and not the billion part. But to put it in context, if we made that number much smaller, let's say it's 1300. About 1300 seconds from now is several minutes from now, but 1.3 billion seconds from now is Sunday, July 27th in 2064. So it's an incredibly large number. And when we talk about disabilities, sometimes we say like, oh yeah, we have 1 or 2 students who are blind or visually impaired, or deaf or hard of hearing, and really, it seems like a small number. It's significantly larger than that. Now, when we talk about accessibility in sessions, there's a big ongoing challenge that comes along with that. And a lot of it is mindset. So I want to be very clear that in this session, I'm not going to be talking about laws or consequences or anything like that. There are plenty of sessions, there are plenty of resources in your business, school, or organization through HR, your compliance group, your accessibility services office, that can give you plenty of information about those laws and consequences. So I'm less inclined to focus on those. I want to talk more about some of the mindsets that we carry with us without realizing it, that can get in the way of us producing content that is as accessible as possible to as many people as possible. And one of the biggest ones that we bring in is that our own personal abilities define our sense of what's normal to others. And as an example of that, I mentioned earlier that I have a disability, which is my vision. I need corrective lenses, but my disability is so well treated that I don't think of it as a disability anymore because I have my glasses. That changes every time I'm playing with our 1 year old or our 3 year old, and they grab my glasses like this, and it's functionally like they're grabbing my eyes. Like I very much need these to do my work, to function in society, to take the kids to and from school later in the week, when my partner and I switch over. And so, it's little things like that where I might not think of this as a disability, even though it is. And so, my zone of normal is corrected vision. So, I might not necessarily think of what it's like to live with a condition like RP, where I might only see maybe this much out of my eyes, just a tiny little bit. And it might not even be a centered circle. If I'm lucky, it'll be towards the center of my vision. But usually with RP, it's off to the side and peripheral. It's very difficult to use vision in that case. That's a condition called retinitis pigmentosa, if I recall correctly. So I'm sorry, I realized I used an acronym without actually explaining it. But our personal abilities define our sense of what's normal. So as a result, it's very easy to overlook people outside our zone of normal. So when we think of things like we think of ourselves, and one example I would give is, let's say you've been asked to provide food for a small get together, and your favorite food is pizza, so you would probably get pizza. And then you get there and you find out, wait, Jeremy's a vegetarian, so no one got a veggie pizza, so Jeremy can't actually eat anything because he doesn't eat meat. So the supreme pizza and the pepperoni and the double pepperoni and all that, can't have that. And it's just because we like those things, so we didn't necessarily think about what other people might like. And it's the same sort of concept when we talk about accessibility. One of my favorite examples of this, and it's actually a sad example, admittedly, was when a disabilities rights advocate was invited to a Cities of the Future conference. And they had invited him to speak because they're like, okay, when we plan our cities, when we build infrastructure, when we expand, what should we be doing to make sure that those cities are accessible for all of our citizens? And they did not even think to include a ramp for this advocate who is permanently in a wheelchair for mobility. So again, it's just that whole idea of our normal is what we consider to be normal, and it's hard to see people outside that. But when we do see people outside that, this is another mindset that we sometimes fall into. We tend to disproportionately focus on observable impairments. I noticed this happened a lot when I was working in higher ed, where we would focus very heavily on students with visual impairments or hearing impairments, because those were usually time intensive tasks to take texts or videos and transcribe them in some way to make them more accessible. But in terms of observable impairments, it's not always easy to see. There are a lot of invisible impairments out there. In fact, about 93% of all impairments are not necessarily easily observed from others. It could be something as simple as insomnia. It could be something like depression or anxiety. It could be something like Crohn's disease is another example that I use. If I have an employee that reports to me who has Crohn's disease, they would very much benefit from a remote working situation where they would be at home, and if they need to use the restroom, they could do that as quickly and as confidentially as possible. So they don't have to announce anything, and they can just go to their restroom where they're already comfortable. Because quite frankly, with Crohn's and with other irritable bowel syndromes, if you gotta go, you gotta go. There's no waiting, there's no raising your hand, there's no, oh, in 5 minutes I'll go. It's I gotta go now, right? So there's a sense of urgency. And that's someone who would benefit from an environment that would be fully remote. And I think that brings up a larger issue, which is when we talk about accessibility and impairment, very often these impairments are not impairments unless the environment creates that impairment. If we are creating circumstances where people can be successful regardless of a disability that they bring to a situation, then we have made that situation accessible. But when we don't, what we've done is we've created an environment that exacerbates that disability and then turns it into an impairment. And so we do have a responsibility to help others who need better access to the spaces that we might be able to comfortably access. And so when we talk about accessibility, I've noticed that it's sort of like traffic laws when it comes to building course content. And what I mean by that is we know we should follow those. We know what we ought to do, but we don't always do it. Right? We know we're supposed to drive the speed limit. Many of us don't. We know we're supposed to come to a full and complete stop at stop signs, and some of us do like the mostly stop and then go. And so it's sort of like that when I see it. So when folks are implementing accessibility, they sometimes see it as this extra thing that they have to do. So they'll do it kind of halfway or just a little bit and not go all the way. And I think a big reason for that is it's historically been very time consuming to make content accessible. If we think about some of the really obvious examples, like taking a video and captioning that video, um, yes, there are services like YouTube or Kaltura or Panopto or Microsoft Stream that will do their best to automatically caption those videos. And some people will just say, okay, check the box, it's done, even though those captions often, almost always need to be corrected. But previously to that, this was a very expensive and time consuming procedure to the point where in most higher education institutions, if they had to take a video and caption it very quickly, they would actually outsource that to a third party service. And what that service would do is there would literally be a human being with the video. They would have a little foot pedal, like a sewing machine or a piano, down on the floor, and that foot pedal would pause or play the video. So they would use that to pause or play, and they would literally type out what they hear. And very time consuming, very expensive. And now we have significantly better tools to do things like that faster and better. And that's where I think artificial intelligence comes into play, because those tasks that were previously really time consuming are a lot easier to do faster and to do right and to do better through the use of artificial intelligence powered tools and platforms. So for those of you who have not seen one of our previous sessions on artificial intelligence, I do like to start with a brief definition of what artificial intelligence actually is and how we might use it. And one of the things that I really like to emphasize with folks is you already use AI all the time. You have been using AI for years. Some really obvious examples are voice powered assistants like Siri or Alexa. And oh, I have one in the room. I hope I didn't activate it, because now it's going to be like, I don't know what you mean. I hope I didn't activate it. So those are really obvious examples, right? The voice assistants that we happen to have with us. But your day is powered by AI in ways that you may not even realize because they just work. So you kind of take it for granted, which is normal. Like when technology works really well, it fades into the background. It's no longer magic. One of those examples I would give is if you have a smartphone, you probably use a biometric scan to unlock your smartphone. So a fingerprint scan or a face scan, all that's powered by AI. That's AI collecting, like, sometimes in some cases almost 10,000 data points about your face or your fingertip and analyzing it very, very rapidly to determine that you are actually who you say you are. And that AI can actually grow over time and learn your appearance as my hair gets longer, or if I get a new pair of glasses, if my beard gets grown out, or if I shave it, it can still figure out that I am me because it learns my appearance over time. We also use AI in email without realizing it. And it's not just the predictive text when you're typing a reply, it's the spam and scam filters, right? There's no one at Google or Microsoft sifting through every single email that comes in that says, okay, this is a phishing scam, this is spam, this is very clearly like someone pretending that they got access to your system when they didn't. No, it's all AI trained models. So we're basically using AI to combat spam and scam to cut down on that. And you can even retrain that model when something slips through those filters by saying this is spam. Like if it ends up in your inbox, you can flag it as spam. Even the keyboard on your phone is AI powered, and it's not just the predictive text where it's trying to guess what word you're typing. It's literally trying to guess which letter you're typing. So if I type the letter A, my keyboard might assume that I'm about to type the word an, as, or at. So N, S, or T would be the next letter. And when you interact with a keyboard, like when you look at a keyboard, you have a QWERTY style keyboard layout on the screen. It's like a vertical phone orientation, just a little screenshot that I took. And there's a box around every letter. So it's just like a vertical rectangular box. And if you press inside that box, it types that letter, right? If I tap the Q, it types the Q. What it's doing in terms of predictive AI, and the reason that digital keyboards work so well, even though there's not a tactile button to press, is because it guesses the next letter that you're going to type, and it invisibly makes those boxes bigger to make it more likely that if your finger goes anywhere near that key, it's more likely to type that. So even if I accidentally tap like the far right edge of the R key, it would type T instead because it's making the bounding box bigger. So we already use AI. We use it a ton. And in terms of what AI is, and I don't want to do a technical explanation, I'm not even going to tell you what GPT and ChatGPT stands for. In terms of a really basic definition, AI is a type of application called an agent. An agent's job is to be an app that helps other apps. That's all it does. One of my favorite examples of this is the weather app on your phone. So the weather app needs multiple agents to run. When you open the weather app, you have expectations, right? You have expectations that when you open it, you're going to see the most recent weather for your location. And for that to happen, it has multiple agents behind the scenes that help that. So we'll call it Agent 001 periodically reminds the weather app that it needs to go get the most recent information. So it contacts Agent 002, and its job is to go out to whatever the weather source it is, maybe it's weather.com or the National Weather Service, get the most recent information, pull it back to the weather app. But to do that, it needs to talk to Agent 003, which tracks your location, because quite frankly, the weather where I am in North Carolina is very different from the weather even in similar states that are close by, like Georgia or Tennessee. And so I want to know the weather for my location right now. So after it gets the location, it goes back, and then it can go out to the National Weather Service or weather.com or wherever and say, I am here. What's the current weather? So that when you open the weather app, everything is just there. As far as you're concerned, it just worked. And sometimes you even see it work in real time when you open the app and it takes a second or two to refresh. It's because all those agents are running behind the scenes to figure out where you are and then go get the most recent information. So these agents work behind the scenes. And that's the first part of the definition of what AI is in my perspective. But AI is also an agent that demonstrates some level of intelligence. So when you give it a task, it tends to think about it in the same way that we might. And in terms of functional steps, usually what happens is, we'll use the word deploy, but basically you put it into an environment and it observes based on its observations, it makes decisions. Based on those decisions, it acts. And this is like us if we're doing a jigsaw puzzle, because we have been deployed to the environment of the tabletop. We observe the puzzle pieces. We decide which two fit together, and then we pick them up and we move them together. So it's the same sort of thing that an AI does as it's working through a process. And sometimes those interactions are really obvious. Like if you talk to Siri and you say, "Hey Siri," it's going to ask you like what the request is, what the command is. But there are a lot of things that happen with AI behind the scenes. So if we're talking about iOS and Siri as an example, behind the scenes, Siri is actually taking all these different agents that track information about you on your device and try and make recommendations based off of how you would think about situations. So the example I like to give is Siri knows your location. It can also access your calendar. So if Siri knows that I'm at home, but knows that based on my calendar, I have a meeting in 1 hour that is a 20-minute drive across town, what it can do is preemptively get the driving directions from here to there to determine, is there construction, is there an accident along the way, and if there's, let's say, some construction I didn't know about that's going to make my drive time closer to 30 minutes, it will send me an alert and say you need to leave earlier. And that's exactly what I would do if Siri didn't exist. If I knew I had a meeting across town and it takes me 20 minutes to drive there, about an hour ahead of time I would check the traffic to see, is there an accident, is there construction that I don't know about, do I need to leave earlier. So it'll think about things in the same way that you do because that's how it's been trained to behave. And one part of AI that we're not going to talk about right now, but I do want to mention, is the idea of machine learning, which all this means is that the models can get better with feedback. Sometimes that feedback comes from us, sometimes that feedback comes from the model's observations. So, in terms of where we are now, because if we're talking about using AI powered tools to improve accessibility and make those tasks faster when we're designing course content, I think it's important to note just how powerful these AI technologies are becoming. And one really popular one right now is ChatGPT. It makes a really nice example of the current power of AI. So, if you aren't familiar with ChatGPT, it's an AI chatbot and it uses a specific type of AI called a large language model. And we have image recognition, we have voice to text, we have speech to text, things like that. But a large language model form of AI, it looks at a huge data set of words and sentences and phrases and books and articles and websites and all that. And it tries to identify associations between words and phrases in different contexts. So if I'm talking to a voice powered AI, it's almost always using a large language model behind the scenes to figure out what I might be asking or commanding. And as an example of that, if let's say Siri hears me say, "I'm looking for a farm of me," it can apply that large language model and go, "Okay, those words don't appear together very often at all. It doesn't make sense in context. Like those words have a very low connection to one another. But words that do sound similar and have a very strong connection to one another are, I'm looking for a pharmacy." So they're probably wanting to know where is the closest Walgreens or CVS or Rite Aid if they're still around. So it's a conversational AI with a chat style interface, kind of with some personality. It even looks like a chat bot, or I'm sorry, a chat interface. It looks a lot like Slack or Discord or even Teams to an extent. So very familiar interface if you've used any type of chat app before. Now, in terms of what ChatGPT can currently do, like, it's powered by a model called GPT-4. So that's the strongest model it has right now. And I won't go too in depth again with what GPT actually means, but I think it's important to know that when this untrained model powering ChatGPT was applied to major assessments and exams that we expect people in the US to take, it performs shockingly well. So it can currently pass the bar exam and become a lawyer in the United States. It has passed the SAT with a score that's about 300 points higher than the average US high school senior. It has passed both the GRE verbal and quantitative methods with passing scores. In fact, on the verbal, it passed with the 99th percentile score. It has passed multiple AP exams. If you are out of the loop on these are exams that high school students can take to preemptively earn college credit. It's scored out of 5. They have to earn a 4 or a 5 to get that credit. It has passed exams from AP history to biology to environmental sciences, macro microeconomics to physics 2 and calculus and chemistry and world history. It has met passing scores on those. And my favorite example is it's actually passed the written exam to become a sommelier, which is a wine expert. If that word is on the tip of your brain. So even though it can't taste, smell, or see, it can pass the sommelier exam and become a licensed sommelier. So it's a very powerful platform. This is a very powerful tool that is freely available at this point. You would be using an older model if you had the free tier of ChatGPT, but this is incredibly powerful. And to put a further point on this, it was tasked with completing the USMLE. This is the exam that doctors in the United States have to pass to become a licensed doctor. And it met or exceeded the passing thresholds for almost every part of that test without any special training or reinforcement. So, usually, when you have an AI do a task, it's trained to do that task. And GPT-4 was not trained to do this task, and it still performed at a level that would lead to licensure to become a doctor. So these tools, suffice it to say, are extremely powerful. And that means that they can do an awful lot of really helpful things for us. That does also mean that there are problems and potential that come along with this. And Brian, yes, absolutely, I love it. I have sometimes used it to create a framework for writing knowledge base and training articles, and it does a surprisingly competent job. Really, really impressive. I've even asked it to work out role permissions for a role that I was trying to build, and it also came up with some really great examples. But along with this power do come some problems and potential. So, generally speaking, again, trying to keep this as non-technical as possible, how most people interact with an AI is you give it a goal, you get a really large set of data to analyze as part of that, and then it figures out the best way to accomplish that goal. And what makes AI work really well is very, very large data sets. It's not about an algorithm at this point, it's about how much information can you put in. And based off of that, you can have some really incredible things happen. One of my examples of what was possible years ago at this point, it's only improved, is it was an app that started off being called WordLens. It was bought out by Google, and it's now part of Google Translate. So you can try this literally right now. And what it does is it takes the camera on your phone, you can point it at printed text and have it translated into a different language on your screen in real time. And it's not just that it's interpreting the text that it's seeing and then translating it into another language, which is already two very impressive steps. But the third most impressive step to me is that it alters the background on your screen on your phone to make it look like you're looking at the text in the other language instead of the original text. So I'll let this play in the background. It's a little hard to stream some of this stuff. Just as a description, they're holding up cards that are written in English and they're being translated to Portuguese live in real time on the screen. So all they have to do is hold up the card while the camera is pointed at that text. And not only is it changing the text, it's actually changing the background that the text is on so that it looks like it's part of the sign. It's very, very impressive stuff that you can do. And this is partly because, again, we just have access to incredible amounts of data to be able to do things like this, like text recognition, and then translation, and then overlaying that technology. It's all powered by AI. So the potential is very, very impressive. In fact, when we talk about the potential, the one thing that I really love about AI is it solves a big problem that we have, which is that time's the one thing that we can't buy more of, right? We can hire more people, we can buy more tools, we can buy subscriptions to platforms. We cannot buy time itself. And where AI really excels as a technology is speeding up tasks that have historically taken a lot of time. And the metaphor that I like to use with folks is I don't know anyone who would complain about using an electric screwdriver instead of a handheld screwdriver because it's faster, it's more efficient, right? If you're working on a little project. Now, granted, I am a believer that you apply the right tool to the right situation. So if you're assembling IKEA furniture, they will literally say, do not use an electric screwdriver because it breaks the wood and sometimes it breaks the screws. But for most general home projects and things like that, or if you're building a deck or replacing a window or tightening up a door frame, something, it makes a lot more sense to use an electric screwdriver rather than a handheld one because it's faster, it's much more efficient, it's less energy consuming, right? It's very easy. And I look at AI the same way. It's just augmenting the work that I already do to make it faster. So when I have more challenging work that I have to do, like making content accessible or generating transcripts or generating audio, I can start to incorporate AI into my workflows to make those things faster and easier to the point where I actually use ChatGPT daily. I use it all the time. I had started off, I just tried it as a curiosity. We were going to do a webinar about it. And now I actually have a full-blown subscription to ChatGPT Plus. If you want to try the underlying technology that powers ChatGPT, The Microsoft Edge browser actually has it built into Bing search right now. So there'll be like a little Bing icon if you install Edge on your computer. You click that, opens up a panel, and you can interact with their chatbot, which is powered by the same technology as ChatGPT, and it's free. So you can try that out today if you want. If you're on Windows, you can even try their image generator, which is powered by AI, which is pretty cool. But I use it daily because it makes cumbersome tasks faster. It simplifies my life. It helps me augment my workflows so that I can do things that typically would consume a lot of time in a much shorter period of time. So I've used it to do things like help me generate training outlines and refine work that I'm working on. I've used it to help me rewrite client emails to shift the tone of them, like just to make sure that I'm not saying something that could be easily misinterpreted as maybe rude. There's no smile key on the keyboard, right? You just want to make sure that folks understand that you have their best interest in mind when you do. So you don't want it to come off as like obviously. So I've used it to improve my LinkedIn speaker bio. I gave it my old bio and told it some of the stuff that I've been up to since then, and it rewrote it for me based off of what I had originally written. And it's really good. I use it all the time now. We've used it for personally health insurance appeals. So, I won't go too far in depth, but I have a family member who had an upper respiratory infection with all of the other members of our family. We have this really special agreement with our 3-year-old's preschool where we give them half our paycheck and then they give us a new disease to try every other week. And we all got really sick. We got to try stuff I'd never even heard of before. And the worst was something called human metapneumovirus, really nasty upper respiratory infection that was going around earlier in spring. And strong lingering cough, especially if you have asthma. So her doctor had recommended an inhaler, and Cigna said, we're not going to cover that. And she was understandably very upset. So we put together a letter, an appeal letter through ChatGPT to use A as a framework when she called in, but B to submit to the insurance company. Because if you're mad and you're writing a letter saying, I need this thing, it's probably going to come off as I'm mad, you're stupid, and then it's not going to go very far. But you can take the emotion out of it by using a tool like this. So things like that. Even the title and description for past webinars. If you're ever struggling to come up with a title, it's a great way to spark some ideas. So I've used it to help me do that too. And the trick is, even though this tool is very powerful, even though these AI powered tools in general are really powerful, that potential can be really problematic. It does introduce a lot of new ethical dilemmas that we have not necessarily prepared to deal with. So while I think there's some potential, I always like to start with this part so that folks know that I'm not just rah rah, like, let's do the brand new technology thing. Like, approach with caution, right? I'm trying to be really deliberate about how I use tools. And one of the biggest challenges that I see with AI is, since AI, it works really well when you give it a lot of data, what happens when there is bias in the data? And we've already seen plenty of examples of AI introducing bias based on gender, based on race. And so when we think about marginalized communities like folks with disabilities, that bias, if it exists in the data, is going to carry through to results and outcomes that you get out of a model. So that's definitely something that needs to be taken into account. And unfortunately, data is not usually scrubbed. Sometimes it is. Sometimes bias is accounted for in the data or the models. But this is something that we absolutely need to think about if we are working with AI technologies to assist marginalized groups in gaining full access to the content that we create. Another issue is the question of access, because I mentioned earlier I have a ChatGPT Plus subscription. That's $20 a month. And to some folks, it's like, oh, just $20 a month. That's just a couple cups of coffee, no big deal. Got some disposable income. I could throw the money that way, no problem. But if we think about how powerful these tools are and that they're seeing more and more and more widespread adoption, I mean, the ChatGPT, if we're sticking with that as an example, hit 100 million active users in just 2 months, record growth, really impressive stuff. But that means a lot of people are using the tool. And a lot of people are incorporating it into their daily work. And if the servers are overloaded, the people with free accounts don't get access to the service anymore. They'll get a message that says, sorry, we're overwhelmed, come back later. But if you have a ChatGPT Plus subscription, you never lose access. So even if their site is down for the free users, you can still use ChatGPT because you're a premium user. If we put this in the context of severe disabilities in the United States, folks who are on disability, who receive government benefits, I'm not sure a lot of folks know this, but they are limited in how much they're allowed to make each month before they would lose their benefits. And that amount is $1,470, which is admittedly not very much. So I would not expect someone who cannot make more than $1,470 a month, or they risk losing their disability benefits and Medicaid and things like that, to have the disposable income to spend $20 to have premium access to a service that a lot of folks are using. So while the ethics of AI are certainly complicated, they have special impacts, I think, on those who are severely disabled or exist within marginalized groups as a result of a disability that they possess. So certainly something to keep in mind. Now, on the flip side of that, yeah, I think we can use these tools cautiously, and I think that we can use them appropriately. And I think we can use them to create content that is more accessible than ever for others. And when we talk about accessibility, again, it's historically been kind of time consuming. It's hard to do the right thing when we're in a hurry. It's hard to do the right thing when we don't necessarily build that time into our course development work. And the cool thing is the use of AI dramatically reduces the time that it takes to create more accessible content. One example that I love to give is a really little known product called Microsoft Word, which has this really unsung feature that I absolutely love, where there is obviously a voice dictation feature, which is excellent for folks with limited mobility, right? If you have, say, fibromyalgia or something like that, it's really easy for you to use the voice dictation feature to have your voice turned into text on the screen. If we think about what's the most common type of impairment in the US, it's a motor impairment, and the most common type of disability within that group is arthritis, which usually affects the hands and fingers. So it's difficult for some folks to type, and having that dictation feature is really nice. But what I also love about it, let me switch tabs here, is let me hop over. Underneath that dictation feature, kind of hidden in there in Word Online, is a transcribe feature. And so this has become a core part of our workflow when we create new videos for our training academy or our support sites. And what you can do is you can take your audio from your video. We just export the audio file, upload it into Word, and it will transcribe the entire thing. And what I find to be really cool is it can actually identify different speakers within the recording. Now, I will say in transparency, it didn't know who I was or who Amy was in this original transcript, but there's a little option where I can change the name. So it'll say like speaker one, speaker two, speaker three, and I can edit that name and then just have it change all of them. So anytime speaker one is speaking, it would say Michael. Anytime speaker two is speaking, it would say Amy. And aside from generating a time-stamped transcript of my audio, I can also add to the document as like just the text, which is what I usually do. And it gives me a big blob of text that I can go through and edit and modify in an interface that I'm already comfortable with. Right, we've been using word processors forever, so using something like Google Drive or Google Docs or Microsoft Word, we're all very familiar with an app like this. So you get to edit your text and fix things in an app that you're already comfortable with. But I even like that it extends beyond that, because you can then take this transcript and either add it directly into a course, or if you have a tool like, let's say you're using YouTube to post your videos, you can copy and paste a transcript into YouTube and it will automatically assign that and turn it into captions and put it in the right spots. Because if you have the text for it, it knows how to figure out who is speaking and when to display those as captions instead of a transcript. So you already are saving a ton of time here, just letting AI help you transcribe this. And what I even love from a documentation standpoint is it saves the audio file as part of the document. So this all becomes part of the document. Your transcript is in here. And this helps with something that I begrudgingly call the hit by a bus rule, because if I walk out the door right now and I'm hit by a bus, do my colleagues have access to all the things that they need so that they don't lose steam and they don't lose access to this stuff? Like, so it's not just living with me, which means that, maybe the audio file was on my computer. Now it's in the document. Now the transcript is here. It's easy to share with everyone. And again, I know it seems like a really simple application, but it's powered by AI. It's very fast. It's easy to fix. because again, the voice transcription usually I find it to be like much closer to 90% accurate at this point, especially if you have higher quality audio. But having everything documented and stored in one place, just absolutely love it. I didn't even plan this out, but it's one of my favorite things that I've found, and I'm always a big believer in like use what you have. So if you have access to Office through work, through school, this is a really nice feature to have. And even if you don't have access to it through work or school, I think the cost is about $6 or $7 a month for your own personal subscription, which usually you can talk someone into paying for. So wanted to mention that while we were in here. Switch back. In terms of other apps that I really love that are becoming more mainstream in terms of their functionality, there's a free iOS app called Seeing AI from Microsoft, and it can do a lot of different things for folks who are blind or visually impaired, like let them know what money they're holding in their hand, or it can scan barcodes on products and let you know what that product is. It can recognize faces and things like that for people that you know. But one thing that I really love is it has a feature where you can send a photo to the app. And what it will do is it will analyze the photo and try and guess what it's looking at. So it's scene description feature. And so if I'm ever struggling to come up with alt text, like a brief description for an image, and this is just a little screencast running in the background that's processing in real time. I'm going to try and pause it real quick because otherwise it starts over. So I have this image here of some kids playing in the background. There's a woman with a laptop at the table. And, you can see the table kind of blends into the couch. So the scene description was probably a person and a couple of children sitting on a couch with a laptop. That's close enough that if I'm having trouble describing an image like this, I would have something that I could run with and quickly modify. And it's saving me that time of having to come up with a description for this photo that I may have trouble getting started with. So this is enough for me to get started with and fix and move on to my next thing, right? And in terms of mainstreaming this technology, one thing that I really want to emphasize is Apple is to me an industry leader in terms of accessibility. They do some really incredible things and they build all their tools in and they're all free, which is I think pretty incredible. So they've done a fantastic job making their mobile devices in particular as accessible as possible. And just 3 days ago, they announced some of the accessibility features that are coming later this year. So I know Seeing AI seems kind of like a pipe dream, but as far as core built-in functionality and not just a third-party app like Microsoft Seeing AI, Apple is going to be rolling that out later this year. And what I love about that is typically other developers like Google and Samsung will go ahead and follow suit and incorporate some of those same features if they haven't already. And this video is going to be really, really hard to see. It's unfortunately not available in a higher quality, but what it's doing is in the background, it's looking at a microwave, and there are different buttons on the microwave that say like pizza or power level or add 30 seconds. And this is a mode where you can point the camera at something if you are blind or visually impaired. And as you move your finger over the button, it will read out loud what the button actually is. Now, I've got this on mute because we're on a webinar. And I don't think the sound's going to come through anyway. But you kind of see like down here, when they move their finger over the add 30 seconds button, it says add 30 seconds. So let me go ahead and wait till it gets over there and try and pause it. And so it says add 30 seconds when their fingers over top of the add 30 seconds button. And what I find to be so impressive about this is the text for add 30 seconds is completely covered. So it knew that it was there ahead of time with its scan. And so as someone's moving their finger, even though they're obscuring the thing that they're looking at through the camera, like that the camera is looking at, it still knows what is there. So this is going to be built-in functionality this year. So I expect this type of a technology, AI-powered technology, to be mainstreamed probably within the next 2 years or so on pretty much every mobile device. So it's pretty impressive that stuff like that is going to exist. There are also some services out there like Prime Voice AI that can take an upload sample of you speaking and generate an AI powered voice that sounds like your voice. And I know that sounds like a little silly, but from a course development perspective, if I'm trying to think of like what's the fastest way for me to do this, I can train an AI model to sound like me, give it the text that I was going to read out loud from my script, and it will generate that audio. And there won't be any flubs, there won't be any ums or ahs, right? It'll be a perfectly recorded audio that I don't have to edit, that I can just move right into the course. But right now, I mean, I know I joked about drinking tea earlier, but my voice is a little froggy from the morning. And so if I had to record some content later for a training course or something like that, and it was time sensitive, I could rely on this technology to help me out if I am losing my voice. Or if you think of other folks who are living with chronic illnesses, like I'll use emphysema as an example. The longer you talk, the more likely you are to cough. So not only is it difficult to talk for longer periods of time, it's actually physically uncomfortable and in some cases physically very distressing. So when you have a technology like this that allows you to create a version of your voice that can read things out loud in your voice, that is pretty powerful. And that's also a technology that's so powerful that a Vice Media reporter used it to hack into his own bank account. So I want to point out, like, hey, this is very compelling, but again, with great power comes great responsibility. He had an audio voice ID to get into his account, and he used the exact same service I just mentioned to break into his account. But in terms of mainstreaming this is also a feature that Apple announced 3 days ago that they're going to be adding in to iOS devices later this year. So they have a training program where you read text for about 15 minutes and then it will generate an AI voice that will sound like your voice. And you will be able to make text or read aloud text in your voice, even on FaceTime calls and things like that. So iOS is on millions and millions of devices, like not even tens of millions, but hundreds of millions of devices. And I would expect that this technology would again be mainstreamed in about 2 years because it's now becoming an industry standard once a major player like Apple or Microsoft or Samsung rolls out something like this. So very, very exciting stuff. And if you check out, gosh, I don't know that I have the link for it handy, but if you Google something like this, like Apple AI tools, May 15th, you'll probably find their press release that goes into everything. So AI can certainly be helpful for rapid course development, but it's also going to speed up those course development tasks that can take a lot of time when it comes to accessibility. So when we think about what makes faster, it can make things like training outlines so you can get into the content faster. It helps with content so you can get into focusing on fixing up your resources faster. It can help with audio narration, like we were just looking at. If I have a student who comes to me and says, I'm just having a lot of trouble with the text, or maybe they use a screen reader, or there might be another learning impairment like dyslexia, where text is really difficult, especially in some of the typefaces that we use. I can quickly use that audio narration tool to generate an audio version of pre-existing text for my learners so that they don't lose any steam or momentum, which I think is pretty fantastic. We quickly generate text transcripts, which then turn into transcripts for my learners with ADHD who might have auditory sensory processing issues where the audio just doesn't sound right to them. The words don't make sense sometimes as they come into their minds. And they can refer to the text transcript and read along instead. And I can also use that transcript to rapidly generate captions, make my videos accessible to learners who might be hard of hearing or deaf, or who just listen to videos with the sound off, which is surprisingly popular. I know it sounds like a silly thing to say, but I think it was TikTok that did a study and found that about a third of their users regularly interact with the app with the sound turned down. Because if you're scrolling through in bed at night, you probably don't want to make a lot of noise. So it's really helpful to have captions that you can generate really quickly for folks in a wide variety of situations. Even avatars and graphics, if you needed to quickly generate images, if you needed higher quality materials or materials that were revised in some way to be a bit more inclusive, you can rely on AI to help assist with some of that. And I think that there are even broader applications of AI that go beyond some specific tools and platforms. So, from a more top level view of where AI can help others, one of my favorite platforms that I've come across in the last year or so is a platform called Mentra. And Mentra is a job search network specifically for job seekers with neurodivergence. So, folks with autism, ADHD, epilepsy, conditions where they would need some accommodations in the workplace. And these don't take away from the high quality folks that they are and the incredible work that they can do. What they need is, again, what we were talking about is the circumstances are what exacerbate something and make it an impairment. If you are creating circumstances where that person can be successful, there's no impairment, functionally speaking. So this is a job site that helps job seekers who are neurodivergent find jobs with employers who are ready and willing and able to extend as much accessibility and account for that in the work environment as they possibly can. So they are looking for high quality staff, and they are willing to do whatever it takes to make sure that that staff member can be successful when they join the company. It's all powered by AI. The folks who are job seekers, you're certainly doing the resume and things like that, but you're also answering a lot of questions, and so are the employers. And then they match up based off of, I think it's, I just want to double check, 76 data points to help job seekers find jobs that would be a really good fit for them. And some of you might be thinking this sounds a lot like online dating, and it is. It's a lot like online dating. It's how a lot of online dating apps work at this point. They analyze a lot of data and then try and figure out, like, okay, these people would probably work well together based off of past experiences. So, Mentra, it's a really interesting website. I love it. I think it's a great service, all AI powered. When we think about ChatGPT, we've talked about some really specific examples, but when we talk about tools like this that can rapidly speed up the development of certain tasks or help with idea generation and things like that, I think of people with chronic illness. And if you've never heard of it, I would encourage you to Google spoon theory. The lady who came up with this is Christine Miserandino, but spoon theory will get you to her. Um, it's basically the idea that folks with chronic illness, they cannot do as much as folks without chronic illness can do in a day, because quite frankly, the basic tasks that we all do cost more. They take more energy, they take more time. It takes more energy to motivate yourself, if you're severely depressed, to get up and take a shower, right? And after that, you might be wiped for the day. You might not have much left to give. Same goes with chronic illness. It can take a while to really work up to something basic like doing the dishes and unloading the dishwasher, right? And at that point, you have less energy left. And when we have a tool like this that can augment work and make some tasks that were historically time consuming and very draining to someone with chronic illness and make them faster and more efficient, make those tasks faster and more efficient, that means that it's also by proxy less taxing on that person, so they can do more with what they have left in the day. And that might be personal self-care, that might be other work. But that to me is a really interesting facet of this, that these AI tools, since they can augment things and make some tasks faster, might also have a beneficial outcome for folks with chronic illnesses who may not have as much to give every day. So this helps them give more. Yep, I have no more spoons. Perfect, Katie. I'm so glad other folks know about the spoon theory, so I'm not just throwing something out there. We're like, why is he talking about silverware? So I would encourage you to track it down. It's a really interesting idea if you haven't heard of it. Another interesting thing that you can do with some of these chatbots is this concept of personas. And what they do is they help you basically just role play a scenario. You can ask the chatbot to take on the identity of someone else, which really opens up almost limitless possibilities in terms of how you want it to act and behave. And so, if you are on a hiring committee, or if you are training someone who will be on a hiring committee or even running a hiring committee, you could use this for something like job interview prep, right? You can describe a specific type of condition, like an autism spectrum disorder. And quite frankly, I don't find it to be a disorder. I don't like the official language there. So someone on the autism spectrum who is applying for a job, you can like explain, this is the scenario. This is who I want you to be. I want you to be someone on the autism spectrum. You're applying for this job. Here's the job description. I'm going to ask you some questions. I want you to let me know if those questions are worded appropriately, if they're sensitively framed, if there's anything in here that I could reword to do better. And you can use it as personal training to try and figure out, like, what are some things that we can do to improve our hiring process, so that when we're interviewing someone with a disability or an impairment or a neurodivergence, that it would be a better experience for them, because there are a lot of high quality folks who are missed out in job searches because maybe they don't perform as well in the social pageant that is a job interview, right? And the small talk and all those fun things and what you do for fun outside of work. So being able to use it as a persona to help you train for job interview prep or working with employees with disabilities or impairments or neurodivergence is a nice way to role play before you get into a live situation, right? So, with all that in mind, I did want to point out we do have some AI resources left over from a previous session that I wanted to share. They're available on OpenLMS Academy. It's just academy.openlms.net. It's a resource course, so it's just resources. There's no activities or anything necessarily, just links and PDFs and things like that. You can purchase the course for $0 US. As part of that purchase process, you can create an account on the site, and we don't use it for marketing. The only time you get a notification is if there's new information added to the course. So all the resources are in there, including a version of the slides from a different presentation about AI, along with a recording of that. But I wanted to share it since I'm talking a lot about some of those resources today. And let me loop back. But yeah, that's our Global Accessibility Awareness Day presentation. We're so pleased that you all joined us today. I really, really appreciate you all joining today and sticking around to the end. It looks like there was a ton of interaction in the comments, and I'm sorry I wasn't able to loop in with that as much as I might have wanted to. I just wanted to make sure that we covered all our content. So if there are any outstanding questions, I'll try and reach those. But I think Maddie just mentioned this in the chat. We are hosting a free AI and Learning Summit in June. I think it's the 18th to the 20th, if I recall correctly. And the two most important things that I want you to know about this are it's free and it's fully online, which is fantastic. So, and Brian, I think the conversion rate is like $5. So $0 in Canadian is $5. But the AI and Learning Conference Summit in June, free, totally online. There, if you want to have extended access to it, you can pay an extra cost. But otherwise, it's totally free. You can invite anyone you want. You can send it out to folks. You can send it out to your instructors, your direct reports, other trainers that you work with, other people in your PLD. We would love to have as many folks there as possible. Totally free, totally online. Brilliant suite of presenters from all over the place. So very, very excited to do that. And I'm not seeing any other questions pop in, just seeing some thanks. So thank you. It's always rewarding to do these when folks show up. So I appreciate you coming and hanging out. I think, Maddie, we could probably end it here unless there aren't any other announcements, and we can give everyone else 2.5 minutes before their next meeting or lunch.